My family threw my funeral while I was in a coma to steal my inheritance and told everyone I was dead. When I woke up 6 months later, I discovered they had already spent everything and were shocked to see me alive. I never thought I'd have to start a story by saying I attended my own funeral, but here we are. My name is David. I'm 31 years old, and 6 months ago, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. What I thought was going to be a routine business trip turned into a nightmare that revealed just how truly evil my own family could be. I should probably start from the beginning. I work in software development and have built a pretty successful consulting business over the past 8 years. I'm not rich by any means, but I've done well for myself. I own my house outright, have a decent amount in savings, and thanks to some smart investments and a small inheritance from my grandmother when I was 25, I had accumulated about $300,000 in various accounts. My family has always been a little dysfunctional, but I thought it was normal sibling rivalry stuff. My older brother, Jake, has always resented my success, claiming I was the favorite child, even though our parents died when I was 22 and he was 24. My sister, Emma, who's 28, has always been jealous of anyone who had more than her. She's bounced between jobs and relationships her whole adult life and constantly asked me for money. The problems really started getting worse about 2 years ago when Emma's husband left her, and she moved back in with Jake and his wife, Monica. Emma lost her apartment and couldn't afford to live on her own, so Jake offered to let her stay in their spare room temporarily. What was supposed to be a few months turned into her basically becoming a permanent resident. Around that same time, Jake's construction business started struggling. He had overextended himself on a few projects and was hemorrhaging money. Between supporting Emma and trying to keep his business afloat, Jake was constantly stressed about finances. Both of them started making more frequent comments about how unfair it was that I had so much money when they were struggling. "It's just sitting there in your accounts doing nothing," Emma would say whenever the topic came up. "You don't even have a family to provide for. What are you saving it all for?" Jake would make similar comments, though he was usually less direct about it. "Must be nice to not have any real responsibilities," he'd say. "Some of us have actual people depending on us." I tried to be understanding. I helped Emma with her car payments a few times and lent Jake money for his business on more than one occasion, but it was never enough, and the resentment toward me seemed to grow instead of diminish. The situation reached a breaking point last December when Emma asked me to lend her $50,000 to start her own business. She had some vague idea about opening an online boutique, but no real business plan or experience in retail. When I said I couldn't lend her that much money, she exploded. "You're so selfish," she screamed at me during our family Christmas dinner. "You have hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting there, and you won't help your own sister start a new life. What kind of brother are you?" Jake jumped in to support her. "She's right, David. Family is supposed to help family. You act like you're better than us just because you got lucky with your little computer business." I tried to explain that $50,000 was a huge amount of money and that I couldn't just hand it over without a solid business plan and some kind of repayment structure. That's when Monica, Jake's wife, said something that should have been a bigger red flag than it was. "Well, we'll all get our share eventually anyway," she said with a weird smile. "What goes around comes around." At the time, I thought she was just making some generic comment about karma or something. Looking back, I realized she was talking about my death. 3 months later, in March, I was driving to a client meeting in Portland when everything went wrong. It was raining heavily, and I was on a winding mountain road when my car hit a patch of standing water and hydroplaned. The car flipped twice before slamming into a tree. I don't remember any of it. According to the medical reports I read later, I was found unconscious at the scene and airlifted to Portland General Hospital with severe head trauma. I had a massive brain bleed and required emergency surgery to reduce the swelling. The doctors weren't sure if I would survive, and if I did, whether I would have permanent brain damage. I was in a medically induced coma for the first month while my brain healed. During that time, my emergency contact was Jake since he was my closest living relative. The hospital called him immediately after my surgery to update him on my condition. Here's where the story gets truly twisted. Instead of hoping for my recovery or even visiting me in the hospital, Jake saw my accident as an opportunity. Within 2 weeks of my coma beginning, he had contacted a lawyer about being appointed as my power of attorney due to my incapacitation. But Jake wasn't planning to use that power of attorney to pay my medical bills or manage my affairs responsibly. He was planning to steal everything I had, and he needed me to be legally dead to do it. The plan they came up with was diabolical in its simplicity. After a month in the coma, Jake told the hospital that the family had decided to withdraw life support. He claimed that I had expressed wishes not to be kept alive by machines, though of course, I had never said any such thing. He forged documents saying he had medical power of attorney and the right to make end-of-life decisions. The hospital staff was confused because my condition was actually improving. The brain swelling had gone down significantly, and my vital signs were strong. The doctors explained to Jake that I had a good chance of recovery if given more time. Jake insisted that the family wanted to let me go with dignity and that keeping me on life support was not what I would have wanted. When the medical staff continued to resist, Jake threatened to transfer me to a different facility that would honor the family's wishes. That's when Jake made his biggest mistake. Instead of actually having me transferred to another hospital where he could more easily carry out his plan, he decided it would be simpler to just tell everyone I had died. He filed a fake death certificate, claiming I had died from complications related to my injuries. Meanwhile, I was still very much alive in my hospital bed, though unconscious. Jake had arranged to have me transferred to a long-term care facility under a false name, claiming I was a John Doe patient with no family. He paid the facility in cash and told them he was a charitable benefactor who wanted to help pay for the care of unidentified patients. With a death certificate on file, Jake was able to begin the process of settling my estate. As my only brother and closest living relative, he stood to inherit everything. Emma, as my sister, would also get a share. Together, they would split my entire life savings. But first, they had to make my death look real to the outside world. That's where the funeral comes in. Jake and Emma planned my funeral for 6 weeks after my supposed death date. They said they had wanted to wait until they could properly grieve and make arrangements. They booked a local funeral home, bought a casket, and sent out invitations to my friends, former co-workers, and extended family members. The obituary they wrote was a masterpiece of fake grief. David passed peacefully after a tragic accident, surrounded by loving family members. He will be remembered for his generous spirit and successful career. In lieu of flowers, donations can be made to the family to help cover unexpected expenses. That last line was particularly galling when I read it later. They were literally asking people to donate money to help them deal with the expenses of stealing my inheritance. According to people who attended the funeral, it was quite a production. Jake gave a tearful eulogy about what a wonderful brother I had been and how much he would miss me. Emma sobbed dramatically throughout the entire service. Monica played the part of the devastated sister-in-law, comforting other mourners and talking about how the family was struggling to cope with the sudden loss. Update. My family threw my funeral while I was in a coma to steal my inheritance and told everyone I was dead. When I woke up 6 months later, I discovered they had already spent everything and were shocked to see me alive. They even had photos of me displayed around the funeral home and a memory book where people could write messages about their favorite memories of me. Several of my friends and former co-workers attended and shared stories about our relationships and my work. The truly sick part was that they seemed to genuinely enjoy the attention and sympathy they received. People brought food, sent flowers, and offered to help the family in any way they could. Jake and Emma were getting all the benefits of being grieving relatives without actually having lost anyone. But they weren't content with just the emotional manipulation. The real goal was financial, and they wasted no time getting started. Within days of the funeral, Jake had accessed my bank accounts using the power of attorney documents and my death certificate. He transferred everything to a joint account that he shared with Emma. $300,000 disappeared from my accounts in a matter of days. My house was put on the market immediately, with Jake claiming that maintaining it was too painful for the family and they needed to sell it to pay for funeral expenses and my outstanding debts. Jake paid off his business loans and bought himself a new truck. Emma put a down payment on a condo and went on a shopping spree that would have made a reality TV star jealous. Monica quit her job and started planning an expensive kitchen renovation. They spent money like they had won the lottery, which in a sense they had. They just had to murder their brother to claim the prize. Meanwhile, I was slowly waking up in the long-term care facility, completely unaware that I was supposed to be dead. The recovery process was gradual and confusing. I would drift in and out of consciousness for weeks, not really understanding where I was or what had happened to me. The staff at the facility had been told I was a John Doe with amnesia. So, when I started asking about my family or trying to remember my own name, they assumed it was part of my brain injury recovery. They were kind and patient, but they couldn't help me contact anyone because they thought I had no one to contact. It took almost 6 months for me to recover enough to have clear memories and be able to communicate effectively. When I finally was able to tell the staff my real name and information, they were confused because it didn't match any of the records. That's when a social worker named Patricia got involved. She helped me piece together what had happened and discover the truth about my supposed death. When she looked up my name in the system, she found the death certificate and was obviously shocked to be sitting across from someone who was very much alive. Patricia immediately contacted the police and the hospital where I had originally been treated. The investigation that followed unraveled Jake and Emma's entire scheme within days. When the police showed up at Jake's house to inform him that his supposedly dead brother was actually alive and wanted to speak with him, his reaction was not what you would expect from someone getting miraculous news about a loved one's survival. Instead of joy or relief, Jake went completely pale and asked if they were sure it was really me. When they confirmed that I was alive and asking about my missing money and property, Jake's first response was to ask if he needed a lawyer. Emma's reaction was even worse. When the police contacted her, she initially insisted that they were mistaken and that I was definitely dead because she had attended my funeral. When they explained that I was very much alive and staying in a care facility, Emma asked how that was possible since they had already buried me. That's when the police realized that if Jake and Emma thought they had buried me, they had been lying about my death from the very beginning. The investigation expanded to include fraud, identity theft, and potentially attempted murder charges. Update 1. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Once the police started digging into what Jake and Emma had done, the full scope of their fraud became clear. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had committed multiple felonies in the process. The fake death certificate was traced back to a corrupt clerk in the county office who had been taking bribes to file false documents. Jake had paid him $5,000 to process my death certificate without the required medical examiner's signature or hospital verification. The forged power of attorney documents were easily exposed once investigators compared the signatures to my actual signature from bank records and legal documents. Jake had done a terrible job of forging my handwriting, and a basic forensic analysis proved the documents were fake. But the most damning evidence came from Jake's own financial records. He had left a clear paper trail of where my money had gone. The $300,000 from my accounts could be traced directly to purchases and payments that Jake and Emma had made. Jake's new truck, Emma's condo down payment, Monica's kitchen renovation, and dozens of other expensive purchases were all made within weeks of my supposed death using money that had been transferred from my accounts. The prosecution also discovered that Jake and Emma had taken out life insurance policies on me without my knowledge about a year before my accident. They had forged my signature on the applications and had been paying the premiums themselves, betting that I would die young and they would collect even more money. When confronted with all this evidence, Jake tried to claim that he had genuinely believed I was going to die and that he was just trying to protect my assets for the family. But the timeline didn't support his story. He had started the process of declaring me dead while doctors were telling him I had a good chance of recovery. Emma took a different approach and tried to blame everything on Jake. She claimed that she had just gone along with his plan because she trusted him and didn't understand the legal implications of what they were doing. But investigators found text messages between Jake and Emma from the weeks after my accident that showed they had planned the entire scheme together. In one exchange, Emma wrote, "How long do we have to wait before we can access the money?" And Jake replied, "Not long. David's never waking up, and even if he does, who's going to believe someone with brain damage?" The cruelest part was a message Emma sent to Monica about a week after my funeral. "I can't believe how easy this was. David was always such a pain about money, and now we don't have to deal with him anymore. It's like Christmas and our birthday all at once." Going home after 6 months of being dead was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. My house had been sold, but fortunately, the new owners were understanding when the police explained the situation. They agreed to let me stay in a hotel while the legal system sorted out returning my property. The house sale was reversed, and Jake was forced to return the money he had received from it. Since he had already spent most of it, he had to take out loans against his own property to pay it back. But getting my money back was more complicated. Jake and Emma had spent almost all of the $300,000 they had stolen. Jake's business was seized as part of the asset recovery process, but it was basically worthless since he had run it into the ground even further after getting access to my money. Emma's condo was foreclosed on when she couldn't make the mortgage payments without my stolen money supporting her lifestyle. Most of her purchases were luxury items that had depreciated significantly. So, even when they were sold, they didn't recover much of the stolen money. The prosecutor estimated that I would be able to recover maybe $150,000 of the original $300,000. And that was assuming Jake and Emma's assets could be liquidated at fair market value. But the money wasn't even the most upsetting part. The betrayal of trust was devastating in ways I hadn't expected. These were the people who were supposed to love me and want me to survive. Instead, they had seen my near-death experience as a business opportunity. I started seeing a therapist to help me process what had happened. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what Jake and Emma had done was a form of psychological murder. They had killed me in every way except physically, and they had celebrated my death while I was fighting for my life. Final update. My family threw my funeral while I was in a coma to steal my inheritance and told everyone I was dead. When I woke up 6 months later, I discovered they had already spent everything and were shocked to see me alive. The hardest part was reading the messages and social media posts from the time when I was supposedly dead. Emma had posted dozens of photos from my funeral with captions about how much she missed me and how unfair it was that I had been taken so young. She had even started a GoFundMe page to help the family cope with the financial burden of my unexpected death. People who cared about me had donated over $15,000 to help my grieving siblings during their difficult time. Reading the comments from friends and former coworkers who had genuinely mourned my death was heartbreaking. These people had cared about me and had been manipulated into supporting the very people who had stolen my life. The criminal trial was a media sensation in our small town. The local newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Man attends own trial after sister and brother steal his life." The courthouse was packed every day with people who wanted to see how the case would unfold. Jake and Emma had hired separate lawyers and were basically trying to throw each other under the bus. Jake's lawyer argued that he was overwhelmed by grief and had made poor decisions while trying to honor what he thought were my wishes. Emma's lawyer claimed that she was just following Jake's lead and didn't understand the legal implications of their actions. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the forged documents, the financial records, the text messages, and testimony from the hospital staff about Jake's suspicious behavior during my coma. The most damaging testimony came from Patricia, the social worker who had helped me piece together what happened. She testified about my confusion and distress when I realized that my family had declared me dead and stolen everything I owned. David wasn't just dealing with the trauma of a serious accident and brain injury, she said. He was dealing with the realization that the people he trusted most in the world had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. They had erased his existence for money. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Jake was found guilty of fraud, identity theft, forgery, and elder abuse. Emma was found guilty of the same charges, though the jury recommended a lighter sentence since she had followed Jake's lead rather than initiating the plan. Jake was sentenced to 8 years in prison in order to pay full restitution for the money he had stolen. Emma got 5 years and the same restitution order. Monica was charged separately for her role in spending the stolen money and got 2 years of probation. But the restitution order was mostly symbolic. Even with the prison sentences, there was no realistic way for Jake and Emma to pay back the money they had stolen. Most of it was simply gone, spent on items and experiences that couldn't be recovered. It's been almost a year now since I came back from the dead, and I'm still rebuilding my life piece by piece. The physical recovery from my brain injury was actually easier than the emotional recovery from my family's betrayal. I've had to rebuild my business from scratch since my clients thought I was dead and had moved on to other consultants. Some of them were willing to work with me again once they learned what had happened, but others were understandably hesitant to hire someone with such a complicated situation. The house sale reversal was finalized, so I do have my home back, but it feels different now. Jake and Emma had been through all of my personal belongings while they were preparing to sell the house. They had thrown away photos, letters, and other sentimental items that they didn't think had monetary value. I found out that they had sold my car, my furniture, and even my clothes to a local consignment shop. They had literally tried to erase every trace of my existence while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. The hardest part has been dealing with friends and extended family members who attended my funeral. Some of them feel guilty for being fooled by Jake and Emma's performance. Others are angry that they were manipulated into mourning someone who wasn't actually dead. A few people have told me that they had suspected something was wrong during the funeral. My cousin Mark said that Jake and Emma seemed more excited than sad and that their grief felt performative, but at the time, people assumed they were just processing grief differently. The community response has been mixed. Most people are supportive and horrified by what Jake and Emma did to me, but some people seem to think I should forgive my siblings and move on because family is family. I've made it clear that I will never have a relationship with Jake or Emma again. What they did wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was a calculated plan to murder me legally and financially while celebrating their success at my funeral. Jake has tried to contact me from prison several times, claiming that he's sorry and wants to make things right. But his letters always include excuses about how stressed he was about money and how he didn't think I would actually recover from my injuries. Emma has been more direct in her attempts at reconciliation. She's written me multiple letters saying that she made a terrible mistake and that she hopes we can rebuild our relationship. She's even suggested that we could be closer now because of what we've been through together. The audacity of that suggestion still takes my breath away. Emma thinks that her attempt to steal my entire life could somehow bring us closer together. She apparently believes that nearly murdering your brother for money is just a bump in the road that family should be able to get past. I've started a new relationship with someone who knows my whole story and accepts the complexity of my situation. Sarah is a nurse who understands trauma recovery, and she's been incredibly patient with my trust issues and ongoing therapy needs. We're taking things slowly, but for the first time since my accident, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm building a life based on the relationships I choose rather than the family I was born into. The money situation is still complicated. I've recovered about half of what was stolen, and my lawyer thinks that's probably the best I can hope for. Jake and Emma will be paying restitution for the rest of their lives, but they'll never be able to fully repay what they took. But I've realized that the money was never really the point. What they stole from me was my sense of security and trust in the people who were supposed to love me. That's something that can't be recovered through court orders or restitution payments. I've learned that family isn't about blood relations or shared genetics. It's about the people who show up for you when you need them most, who celebrate your successes and support you through failures. Jake and Emma failed that test in the most spectacular way possible. Now I'm focused on building relationships with people who have earned my trust and who see my survival as something to celebrate rather than something to profit from. It's a smaller circle than before, but it's genuine in ways my biological family never was. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about what happened, and the answer is complicated. I'm angry about the betrayal and the time I lost rebuilding my life. But I'm also grateful that I survived to see who my siblings really were before I trusted them with anything else important. In a strange way, their attempt to kill me gave me a second chance at life. Not just because I survived the accident and coma, but because I learned to value the relationships and experiences that truly matter. I'm more selective about who I trust, but I'm also more appreciative of genuine kindness and loyalty. Jake and Emma thought they were getting away with a perfect crime. They thought they could erase me from existence and live happily ever after on my money. Instead, they lost everything that mattered, their freedom, their reputations, and any chance at real family relationships, while I got a chance to start over with people who actually care about my well-being. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. And I'm finally learning how to do that. Okay, guys. Now, it's time to read what the viewers had to say. The first comment says, "This is absolutely horrifying, but also inspiring. The fact that your own siblings tried to literally erase you from existence for money. I can't even imagine the betrayal, but you're so strong for rebuilding your life and not letting their evil destroy you completely." Let's move on to the next comment that says, "Reading about them, celebrating at your funeral while you were fighting for your life in a hospital bed made me physically sick. The level of planning and calculation that went into this is beyond psychopathic. I'm so glad you survived and they got caught.